"You don't belong here. Take your newspapers and leave before I call security." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, sharp and dismissive. Marcus Walker stood still, his rough hands clutching the stack of newspapers that had become his lifeline. Rain dripped from his jacket onto the pristine marble floor of the boutique, a small puddle forming beneath his worn-out shoes. He wasn't here to beg. He wasn't here to cause trouble. Marcus was here for one simple reason: to offer an honest product in exchange for an honest dollar. But to the sharp-tongued employee standing behind the counter, his very presence was an offense, an unwelcome blemish in the world of designer clothes and polished egos. Marcus had endured words like these before. They weren't new to him, just another chapter in the long book of indignities he'd quietly endured over the years. But when the boutique's glass doors swung open and his daughter Sophia stormed in, everything changed. "How dare you speak to him like that?" Sophia's voice cut through the air like a lightning bolt, every word trembling with emotion, yet steady with conviction. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and the boutique's carefully curated world of wealth and exclusivity cracked wide open. Sophia strode to her father's side, standing tall against the judgmental stares of the staff and customers. Her voice grew stronger as she addressed the room. "This man is my father, and he is worth more than every single item in this store." The silence was deafening, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. But Sophia didn't waver. And in that moment, Marcus wasn't just a man selling newspapers. He was a father, a symbol of resilience, and the spark that would ignite a fire of change. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? A moment that shook you to your core and made you question the way the world works? Maybe it reminded you of a time when you stood up for someone, or when someone stood up for you. This story will take you on a journey of courage, resilience, and transformation. As you watch it unfold, let it remind you of the power we hold to make a difference. And if this story speaks to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in the message of compassion and courage, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. By subscribing, you're not just supporting stories like Marcus and Sophia's. You're becoming part of a community that values kindness, respect, and the power of standing up for what's right. Thank you for being here, and let's dive into this unforgettable journey together. The rain had just started to drizzle over the bustling streets of Atlanta, Georgia, as Marcus Walker carefully unfolded his stack of newspapers. The streetlights reflected against the wet pavement, casting a faint glow that gave the chilly morning an odd sense of warmth. Marcus, a tall black man in his mid-50s, stood at the corner of Peachtree and Baker Streets, his usual spot. His figure, clad in a worn-out jacket and scuffed shoes, was a stark contrast to the bright billboards advertising luxury brands above him. Marcus had become a familiar sight to passers-by, though many barely noticed him anymore. He wasn't just selling newspapers, he was selling hope. Each headline he held out was a testament to his determination to provide a better life for his daughter, Sophia. As he adjusted his cap to shield his face from the rain, his eyes darted across the street to Regal Vogue, one of the most prestigious high-end fashion stores in the city. The boutique stood like a fortress of wealth and privilege. Its massive glass windows showcased elegant mannequins draped in gowns worth more than Marcus made in a year. Inside, warm lighting bathed the showroom in an inviting glow, a deliberate attempt to create a world far removed from the gray streets outside. Marcus couldn't help but think about the divide between people who walked into that store and people like him, who were judged before they even got close. "Newspapers, get your papers here," Marcus called out, his deep voice echoing faintly through the drizzle. A young couple in tailored coats passed by without so much as a glance. He sighed but kept his smile intact. Marcus had learned long ago that resilience was the only armor he could afford. Across the street, Emma Carter, the boutique's front desk associate, stood behind the polished counter of Regal Vogue. At 28, Emma had worked her way up from a small-town department store to this glitzy position. With her sleek blonde hair pulled into a ponytail and her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the marble countertop, she exuded the image of someone who belonged in a place like this, or at least someone who desperately wanted to belong. Emma was good at her job. She greeted customers with the kind of charm that made them feel important. But behind her polished exterior was an unshakable insecurity. She'd clawed her way out of her modest upbringing in rural Alabama, and the fear of being dragged back down drove her every action. To Emma, appearance was everything. People who didn't fit the mold, people like Marcus, made her uncomfortable because they reminded her of a life she wanted to forget. Through the glass doors, Emma spotted Marcus standing with his newspapers. She rolled her eyes and turned to her coworker, a younger man named Jacob. "Look at that guy," she muttered under her breath. "He's been standing there for hours. Why doesn't he just get a real job?" Jacob glanced at Marcus briefly before shrugging. "He's not hurting anyone," he replied nonchalantly. Emma scoffed. "That's not the point. This is Regal Vogue. People don't come here to see that." She waved a dismissive hand toward Marcus, her tone dripping with disdain. Jacob said nothing, sensing the futility of arguing. Emma's sharp tongue was infamous among the staff, and most knew better than to engage her when she got into one of her moods. Meanwhile, on the sidewalk, Marcus felt the first pangs of hunger gnawing at his stomach. He pulled a small sandwich from his bag, but before he could take a bite, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the boutique. Out stepped a group of young professionals, laughing and chatting as they entered the store. One of them, a tall man in a designer coat, glanced at Marcus and smirked. "Nice weather, huh?" the man said sarcastically, flicking a dollar bill toward Marcus as if it were an act of charity. Marcus caught the bill but didn't react to the man's mocking tone. "Thank you," he said simply, folding the bill and tucking it into his pocket. He had long since mastered the art of swallowing his pride. As the group disappeared into the store, Marcus's gaze followed them briefly before he turned his attention back to the newspapers. But inside, something stirred, a mix of frustration and sadness that he couldn't shake. He often told himself that dignity was worth more than anyone's approval, but moments like this tested that belief. Clara Richardson, a well-dressed woman in her late 40s, exited the boutique carrying an elegantly wrapped shopping bag. She paused near Marcus, her eyes scanning his weathered face. Unlike many others, Clara didn't avert her gaze. Instead, she smiled and stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm. "How much for a paper?" Marcus's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Just $1, ma'am." Clara handed him a $5 bill. "Keep the change," she said, as she took a paper from him. She lingered for a moment, sensing there was more to this man than met the eye. "Thank you, ma'am. God bless you," Marcus said, tipping his hat. Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. As she walked away, she glanced back at Marcus one last time. There was something about him, his quiet dignity perhaps, that stayed with her. Inside the store, Emma watched the exchange through the glass with a look of disdain. "What kind of person buys a newspaper from someone like him?" she muttered to Jacob. Jacob shrugged. "Maybe someone who doesn't judge a book by its cover," he replied. Emma didn't respond. She was too busy hatching a plan to make sure Marcus wouldn't linger near the store much longer. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the events of this rainy day were about to set off a chain reaction that would change his life forever. The rain intensified, drumming softly against the glass storefront of Regal Vogue. Marcus adjusted his cap and pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders, though it did little to shield him from the cold. He stood with his stack of newspapers, observing the people who entered and exited the boutique. Each one seemed to move with an air of untouchable confidence, their designer coats and shoes a stark contrast to his own worn attire. His thoughts briefly wandered to Sophia, his daughter. She had called him earlier that morning, her voice bright despite the pressures of her final year in college. Sophia had always been ambitious, her dreams as vibrant as the sketches she created. Marcus often told her that her creativity would take her places he could only imagine, but deep down, he worried. He knew the world she was stepping into, a world of privilege and prestige, wasn't built for people like them. It was a world that judged by appearances, a world where someone like Marcus could be dismissed without a second thought. Inside the boutique, Emma Carter leaned against the marble counter, watching Marcus through the glass with a scornful expression. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't just leave. His presence, she thought, clashed with the carefully curated luxury of Regal Vogue. "Honestly, it's embarrassing," Emma muttered to Jacob. "This is supposed to be a high-class store. What if a VIP client sees him loitering out there?" Jacob glanced at Marcus briefly. "I don't think he's hurting anyone," he replied. "He's just trying to sell newspapers. It's not a crime." Emma rolled her eyes. "It's not about crime. It's about image. People come here to feel special, to be surrounded by elegance. That man, she gestured toward Marcus with her manicured hand, is the opposite of that. Before Jacob could respond, the boutique's doors opened and a group of young professionals entered, their laughter filling the air. Among them was Ethan Carter, the boutique's owner and Emma's boss. Ethan, a man in his early 30s, exuded confidence. His tailored suit fit perfectly, and his sharp features gave him an air of authority. "Emma," Ethan called out as he approached the counter, "is everything running smoothly?" Emma straightened, her demeanor shifting instantly to one of professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Carter, just handling the usual clientele." Ethan nodded, his gaze briefly shifting toward the door. He noticed Marcus standing outside and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. A moment of compassion. Outside, Marcus was about to pack up and leave when he noticed a young woman struggling with an umbrella and a shopping bag. The wind had turned her umbrella inside out, leaving her drenched and frustrated. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward. "Here, let me help you," he said kindly, taking the broken umbrella from her hands. The woman looked surprised but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. Marcus handed her a dry newspaper to shield her bag from the rain. "It's not much, but it'll keep your things dry," he said with a gentle smile. The woman glanced at him, noting his weathered face and kind eyes. "Thank you," she repeated. She reached into her purse and handed him a $10 bill. "Please take this." Marcus hesitated for a moment before accepting it. "God bless you, ma'am," he said sincerely. The woman smiled and hurried into the boutique. Her interaction with Marcus didn't go unnoticed by Emma, who was watching from the counter. The turning point. Emma's patience finally snapped. She marched toward the door, opening it just wide enough to step out. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement as she approached Marcus, her expression hard. "You need to leave," she said sharply. Marcus looked at her, his brows furrowing. "I'm not bothering anyone," he replied calmly. "You're bothering me," Emma shot back. "This is a luxury boutique, not a street corner. Go sell your newspapers somewhere else." Before Marcus could respond, the boutique's doors opened again, and Clara Richardson, the woman who had bought a newspaper from Marcus earlier, stepped out. "Excuse me," Clara said, her tone icy. "Is this how Regal Vogue treats people?" Emma froze, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Ma'am, Clara cut her off. "I'm appalled. This man has done nothing wrong. You, on the other hand, have been nothing but rude. I'll be sure to let others know about this appalling behavior." Marcus looked at Clara with gratitude, but before he could thank her, the boutique's doors opened yet again. This time, it was Sophia. Sophia's arrival. Sophia stepped into the rain, her eyes immediately landing on her father and Emma. She had been inside, searching for inspiration among the boutique's designs, but the raised voices had drawn her attention. "Dad?" she called out, her voice cutting through the tension. Marcus turned toward her, his expression softening. "Sophia," he said, relief washing over him. Sophia walked quickly to his side, her umbrella shielding both of them from the rain. She looked at Emma, her eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. Clara, however, stepped forward. "This young woman," Clara said, gesturing toward Emma, "was just telling your father he doesn't belong here." Sophia's face hardened. She turned to Emma, her voice calm but firm. "Is that true?" Emma stammered, searching for an excuse. I was just trying to maintain the boutique's image. You mean you judged him based on how he looks?" Sophia interrupted. Her voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. "Let me tell you something. My father is the most hard-working, honorable man I know. And if anyone doesn't belong here, it's someone who lacks basic respect for others." Emma's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The storm before the calm. The tension hung thick in the air as Sophia stood protectively beside her father. Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Let's just go." But Sophia wasn't ready to back down. She looked at Emma one last time, her voice laced with both anger and disappointment. "You should be ashamed of yourself." As Sophia and Marcus turned to leave, the boutique's doors opened once more, and Ethan stepped outside. He had heard enough to realize something had gone terribly wrong. "What's going on here?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but authoritative. All eyes turned to him, and in that moment, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The tension from the rain-soaked street spilled into the boutique as Ethan Carter stood before the gathering crowd, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. The elegant warmth of Regal Vogue's interior now felt oddly cold as whispers rippled through the room. Ethan's presence commanded attention, not just because he owned the boutique, but because he radiated an air of control and authority that silenced the murmurs. Sophia, still standing protectively beside Marcus, met Ethan's gaze with defiance. Her heart pounded, but she refused to waver. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about standing up to the pervasive judgment and casual cruelty she had seen so many times before. "Mr. Carter," Emma began, her voice shaky but trying to maintain composure. "I was only addressing a situation that could have affected the boutique's image. This man," she gestured toward Marcus, "was loitering outside, and I thought it was best to handle it before it escalated." Escalated into what, exactly? Ethan's voice was calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it. His question cut through Emma's attempted justification like a scalpel. He didn't look at her as he spoke. His attention was fixed on Marcus and Sophia, their soaked clothing and weary expressions a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them. The clash of worlds. Ethan turned his full attention to Marcus, his tone shifting to one of measured politeness. "Sir, I apologize for whatever misunderstanding has taken place. My name is Ethan Carter, and I own this boutique. May I ask what brought you here today?" Marcus adjusted his posture, his dignity intact despite the degrading ordeal. "I was just selling newspapers, trying to make an honest living," he replied. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable weight, each word a testament to years of resilience. Sophia stepped in before Ethan could respond. "Your employee didn't just misunderstand," she said firmly. "She insulted him. She treated him like he wasn't even human. And for what? Because he doesn't look like your usual clientele?" Her voice cracked slightly, but her determination burned bright. Emma interjected, her composure beginning to crack. "With all due respect, I was only doing what I thought was best for the boutique. This is a luxury store, and certain appearances, well, they matter." Sophia turned to Emma, her frustration boiling over. "Appearances matter? That's what you're clinging to? Do you think a fancy coat makes someone better than my father? Let me tell you something. He's worked harder in one day than most people do in a month, and no amount of designer clothes or polished floors can cover up the ugliness of what you've just said." Ethan raised a hand, silencing the heated exchange. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "Emma, go inside. We'll talk later." Marcus's dignity. Marcus shook his head slightly and spoke to Sophia in a voice meant only for her. "Sophia, let it go. We don't need to cause a scene." His words were soft, but there was a depth of pain behind them, a pain that came from years of swallowing his pride to protect those he loved. Sophia looked at her father, her anger giving way to a swell of sorrow. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you shouldn't have to put up with this." Ethan stepped forward, addressing Marcus directly. "Sir, I admire your patience. Not many people could handle what you just went through with such grace. But please understand, this behavior is not what I stand for, and I assure you it will be addressed." Marcus gave a small nod. "I appreciate that, Mr. Carter, but I've faced worse. You learn to keep your head down and move on." Ethan paused, something in Marcus's tone striking a chord deep within him. He recognized the quiet dignity in the man before him, and it unsettled him to think how easily someone like Marcus could be overlooked, or, worse, dismissed entirely. The unexpected ally. As the conversation continued, Clara Richardson re-entered the scene. She had watched the events unfold from a distance and decided it was time to step in. "I couldn't leave without saying something," Clara said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. She turned to Ethan. "Your employee's behavior was unacceptable. If this is the kind of culture you foster here, I'm afraid you'll lose more than just my business." Ethan's jaw tightened, the weight of Clara's words pressing down on him. Regal Vogue's clientele was its lifeblood, and Clara's disapproval carried a significant risk. "I assure you, Mrs. Richardson, this is not the standard we uphold," he said carefully. "I take full responsibility for what happened and will ensure it doesn't happen again." Clara's gaze softened slightly, but her eyes still held a flicker of disappointment. "See that you do," she said before turning to Marcus. "And you, sir, I want to thank you for your kindness earlier. You're a reminder that decency still exists, even in places where it's often forgotten. Marcus gave her a humble smile. Just trying to do my part, ma'am. The gathering storm. As Clara left, the boutique felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened. Ethan turned back to Sophia and Marcus, his mind racing. He needed to diffuse the situation, but he also felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just as a businessman, but as a human being. Sophia, he began, his voice softer now, I didn't know your father was here. If I had... Sophia cut him off, her eyes narrowing. If you had what? Would that have changed anything? Would you have stopped your employee from judging him based on nothing but his clothes? Ethan hesitated. No, he admitted. It wouldn't have changed the fact that what happened was wrong, but I would have intervened sooner. Sophia folded her arms, her frustration still simmering. This isn't just about what happened today. It's about the kind of culture you're allowing in your store. You can't let people like Emma represent your brand if you want it to mean anything. Ethan nodded slowly, her words hitting him harder than he expected. You're right, he said finally, and I'll make it right, but first, let's get out of this rain. He gestured toward the boutique, inviting them inside. Marcus hesitated, but Sophia gently urged him forward. Come on, Dad, she said softly. Let's hear what he has to say. Ethan led Marcus and Sophia into the boutique, the sharp click of Sophia's wet heels echoing against the pristine marble floor. The warm lighting of Regal Vogue's interior felt almost mocking compared to the tension still hanging in the air. A few customers glanced up briefly, their eyes darting between the soaked trio and the silent employees who seemed unsure of what to do. Marcus hesitated as they stepped inside, his calloused hand brushing against Sophia's arm. We don't need to be here, sweetheart, he murmured, his voice low but steady. Sophia, still gripping his arm protectively, didn't slow her stride. No, Dad, we absolutely need to be here, she replied, her tone firm. This isn't just about us. It's about people like Emma, thinking they can treat anyone however they want. Ethan glanced over his shoulder at them, his jaw tightening. He could feel the weight of their frustration and knew he was standing at a crossroads. This wasn't just another day at Regal Vogue. This was a reckoning. They reached a small seating area in the corner of the store, and Ethan gestured for them to sit. Marcus hesitated again, glancing at the plush leather chairs that seemed completely out of place for someone like him. Sophia gave him a reassuring nod, and reluctantly, he sat down. Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water? Ethan asked, his tone careful. No, thank you, Marcus replied simply. Sophia crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Ethan. We're not here for pleasantries. What are you going to do about this? Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He knew there was no easy way out of this. First, he began, his voice measured, I want to apologize to both of you. What happened today is unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on this business and on me. I take full responsibility. Sophia didn't respond immediately, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Words are easy, she said finally. What's going to change? Before Ethan could answer, the boutique's doors swung open and Emma Carter stepped inside. Her face was flushed, whether from embarrassment or anger. It was hard to tell. She glanced at Ethan, then at Marcus and Sophia, her lips tightening. I thought you wanted to talk later, she said to Ethan, her voice strained. Ethan straightened, his tone turning sharper. I do, but since you're here, maybe you'd like to explain yourself. Emma's eyes darted around the store, noting the curious stares of customers and staff alike. Her hands clenched at her sides. I already explained, she said defensively. I was doing what I thought was best for the store. People come here for a certain experience, and he, she gestured toward Marcus, was ruining it. Sophia shot to her feet, her voice trembling with fury. Ruining it? My father was standing outside in the rain, trying to earn an honest living. How does that ruin your so-called experience? Do you even hear yourself? Emma flinched at Sophia's words but didn't back down. This is a luxury boutique, she said, her tone turning haughty. People don't come here to see whatever that is. Sophia stepped closer, her voice rising. Whatever that is, that's a man who sacrificed everything for his family. That's a man who deserves more respect than you'll ever understand. Ethan stepped between them, raising a hand to diffuse the escalating tension. That's enough, he said firmly. He turned to Emma, his expression cold. Go to the back and wait for me there. Emma hesitated, her jaw tightening, but one look at Ethan's face told her she had no choice. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the back room. Sophia took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she sat back down. Marcus placed a calming hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "Dad," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I can't stand seeing them treat you like this. It's not right." Marcus gave her a small, tired smile. "It's not about what's right, sweetheart," he said gently. "It's about what you can live with. And I've learned to live with a lot." Ethan, who had been watching the exchange silently, felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Shame, perhaps, or guilt. He cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. "You're right, Marcus," he said. "You shouldn't have to live with this. And Sophia's right too. Things need to change." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Then start with her," she said bluntly, nodding toward the direction Emma had gone. "I intend to," Ethan replied. "But this isn't just about Emma. This is about the culture here, and that starts with me. I've let things slide because I was focused on keeping the business afloat. But that's no excuse." Marcus studied him for a long moment before nodding. "It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong," he said quietly. "But words don't mean much unless you back them up." Ethan met his gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "You have my word," he said. "Things will change." Before anyone could respond, a young sales associate approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice nervous. "There's someone here asking for you. She says it's important." Ethan frowned but nodded. "I'll be right there." As the associate left, Ethan turned back to Marcus and Sophia. "Please don't leave yet. I'll handle this quickly, and then we'll continue our conversation." Marcus and Sophia exchanged a glance but said nothing as Ethan walked away. The boutique was quieter now, the tension from earlier still lingering in the air. Sophia leaned closer to Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you believe him?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the store, the pristine displays, the polished floors, the customers who barely noticed them. Finally, he said, "I want to. But trust isn't something you give away for free. It has to be earned." Sophia nodded, her eyes lingering on the door Ethan had disappeared through. She wanted to believe too, but like her father, she knew better than to trust too easily. The rain outside had stopped, but inside the boutique, the storm was far from over. As Marcus and Sophia sat in the boutique's corner, a subtle hum of activity returned to the store. Customers whispered to one another, some feigning disinterest but clearly curious about the commotion. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the weight of their stares pressing down on him. Sophia, ever the protective daughter, remained resolute, her gaze fixed on the back room where Emma had disappeared. The boutique's glass doors opened again, and a man in a tailored suit strode in, his movements brisk and purposeful. Ethan reappeared moments later, his expression serious. He gestured for Marcus and Sophia to follow him into a private office at the back of the store. The office was immaculate, furnished with sleek, minimalist decor that mirrored the boutique's aesthetic. Ethan closed the door behind them and took a seat across the desk. He steepled his fingers, his gaze steady as he looked at Marcus. "Before we continue," Ethan began, his voice calm but firm, "I want to thank you both for your patience. I also want to acknowledge that no apology can undo what happened here today, but I intend to make this right." Sophia leaned forward, her arms crossed. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" she asked, her tone edged with skepticism. Ethan met her eyes without flinching. "By ensuring that what happened to your father doesn't happen again. To anyone. This isn't just about firing Emma or making promises. It's about changing the way this store operates, from the top down." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "And what does that look like?" he asked quietly. Ethan hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "It starts with accountability, for myself, for my employees, and for the culture I've allowed to take root here. It means reevaluating our training, our hiring practices, and the way we interact with people, not just our customers, but everyone." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "And Emma? What happens to her?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Emma's actions today were inexcusable. She will no longer be a part of this team. That's non-negotiable." Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to his hands. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the conversation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice low but steady. "I've been judged my whole life, for the color of my skin, for the work I do, for not fitting into places like this. You're telling me you want to change that. I hope you mean it, because if you don't, this won't be the last time something like this happens." Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. "I do mean it, sir. And I'll prove it, not just to you, but to everyone who walks through these doors." Sophia leaned back in her chair, studying Ethan carefully. She wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily, especially not after what they'd just experienced. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. The young sales associate who had approached earlier stepped in, her expression nervous. "Mr. Carter," she said hesitantly, "there's a delivery person at the front asking for you. They're refusing to leave until they speak with you directly." Ethan frowned but rose from his chair. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, glancing at Marcus and Sophia. "I'll be right back." As the door closed behind him, Sophia turned to her father, her voice low. "What do you think? Do you believe he's serious about changing things?" Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze distant. "He's saying all the right things, but words are just words. Time will tell if he's willing to back them up with action." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. She wanted to believe Ethan, but years of witnessing her father's struggles had made her cautious. Outside the office, Ethan approached the front of the boutique, where a delivery driver stood waiting. The man was tall, with a rough demeanor and a clipboard in hand. He looked out of place among the store's sleek surroundings, but his expression was unapologetic. "I need you to sign for this," the man said gruffly, handing Ethan the clipboard. Ethan signed without hesitation, his mind still preoccupied with the events of the day. As the delivery driver handed over a small package, he paused and said, "You know, I saw what happened earlier. That guy out front, the one selling newspapers, he's got more class than half the people who walk through these doors." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the comment. "You know him?" The man shook his head. "Not personally, but I've seen him around. He's a good guy, honest, works hard. You don't see that much anymore." The delivery driver tipped his cap and left, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the boutique, the package heavy in his hands. Back in the office, Sophia was scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself from the simmering frustration that still lingered. Marcus sat quietly, his hands clasped in his lap. When Ethan returned, he seemed different, quieter, more introspective. "I wanted to share something with you," Ethan said as he sat back down. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I grew up in a small town. My parents ran a diner, and I spent most of my childhood helping out, cleaning tables, washing dishes, whatever needed to be done. We didn't have much, but my parents taught me the value of hard work and treating people with respect." He paused, his gaze steady. "Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I got caught up in building this business, in creating a brand that people would admire, but what happened today reminded me of what really matters." Marcus studied Ethan carefully, his expression softening slightly. "It's easy to lose your way," he said quietly. "The important thing is finding it again." Sophia remained silent, her emotions swirling. She wanted to believe Ethan's sincerity, but the day's events had left her guarded. As they prepared to leave, Ethan stood and extended his hand to Marcus. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right," he said sincerely. Marcus hesitated before shaking his hand. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The real work hasn't even started." Ethan nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. He turned to Sophia, who met his gaze with a mixture of hope and caution. "And thank you," he added, "for holding me accountable." Sophia gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. As they walked out of the boutique, the rain had started again, a gentle drizzle that seemed to wash away some of the tension from the day. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter around him, but this time there was a subtle lightness to his step. Sophia glanced at him, her heart swelling with pride. "You didn't just hold your head high today, Dad," she said softly. "You reminded everyone else to do the same." Marcus gave her a small smile, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "It's not about what you say, Sophia," he replied. "It's about what you do. And you did good today." The rain persisted as Marcus and Sophia walked down the street, their reflections shimmering faintly on the wet pavement. The events inside Regal Vogue still lingered heavily in the air between them, unspoken but ever present. For Sophia, her mind churned with questions, frustrations, and a strange mix of hope and skepticism. For Marcus, the weight of years spent enduring quiet indignities felt heavier than ever, yet he carried it with the same stoic resolve that had defined his life. "Dad," Sophia said, breaking the silence, "I want to believe Ethan, but how many times have we heard promises like that? Do you think anything will really change?" Marcus glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've got every right to doubt him," he said softly. "But sometimes people surprise you, and sometimes they don't. All we can do is keep our dignity and let time show us what's real." Sophia nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as she recalled Ethan's determination. "I just don't want him to use words to smooth things over while people like Emma get away with treating others like that." Before Marcus could respond, a voice called out from behind them, "Marcus!" They turned to see Clara Richardson approaching, a large umbrella shielding her from the rain. Despite the storm, her presence radiated a calm, steady warmth. She smiled at Marcus as she reached them, but there was an edge of urgency in her expression. "Clara," Marcus greeted her, tipping his hat politely. "You didn't have to come out in this weather," Clara waved off his concern. "I needed to find you. What happened back there? Well, it's been bothering me, and there's something you should know." Sophia furrowed her brow. "What is it?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering between Marcus and Sophia. "It's about Ethan. I've known him for years, not personally, but through business circles. He's a good man, but his rise to where he is now wasn't easy. There are complications in his past that might explain some of what you saw today." Sophia crossed her arms, her curiosity piqued. "Complications?" Clara nodded. "Ethan didn't inherit his wealth like most people assume. He built it from the ground up after breaking away from his family's expectations. His parents wanted him to follow a very specific path, one that didn't involve starting a boutique or designing clothes. When he refused, they cut ties with him. Everything he has now, he earned himself. But that kind of rejection leaves scars." Marcus listened intently, his expression softening. "And you think that's why he might have let things slide in his store?" "Perhaps," Clara said carefully. "Ethan has always been determined to prove himself, to be seen as legitimate in the eyes of people who once looked down on him. That drive might have blinded him to the behavior of people like Emma, but I believe he truly wants to make things right." Sophia mulled over Clara's words, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "So he's fighting his own battles while trying to fix a system he's a part of. That's complicated." "It is," Clara agreed. "But complicated doesn't mean impossible." As the three of them stood under the umbrella, the rain continued to fall in rhythmic patter, punctuating the weight of the conversation. Sophia's mind raced, torn between her anger at what had happened and a growing understanding of the challenges Ethan faced. She didn't want to excuse his mistakes, but she couldn't ignore the possibility of his sincerity either. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "People deserve a chance to prove themselves, but they don't deserve blind trust. If Ethan means what he says, we'll see it in his actions." Sophia nodded slowly, a sense of clarity settling over her. "You're right, Dad, and if he doesn't, I won't let it slide." Clara smiled, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "You're both remarkable. It's no wonder Ethan looks up to you, Sophia. You have a strength that can move mountains." Sophia blushed slightly but didn't respond, her thoughts already returning to the next steps. Meanwhile, back at Regal Vogue, Ethan sat alone in his office, the events of the day replaying in his mind like a broken record. The delivery driver's words had stuck with him, stirring something deep within that he couldn't ignore. "You don't see that much anymore," the man had said about Marcus. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Marcus's quiet dignity and Sophia's fierce determination had shaken him. For years, he had focused solely on building his business, chasing success at all costs. But in doing so, he had allowed cracks to form in the very foundation of what he had hoped to create, a space where beauty, artistry, and inclusivity could thrive. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Jacob, the younger associate who had witnessed the confrontation earlier. "Come in," Ethan said, straightening in his chair. Jacob entered cautiously, closing the door behind him. "I just wanted to say, I think what you did out there, bringing Marcus and Sophia inside, was the right call. And, well, I think there's a lot we can learn from what happened today. Ethan studied Jacob for a moment, appreciating the young man's honesty. I agree, he said finally, and it starts with accountability. We've let things go unchecked for too long. That ends now. Jacob nodded, relief washing over his face. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. There is, Ethan said, his tone firm. Starting tomorrow, we're holding a meeting with the entire staff. No exceptions. We're going to address what happened today and make sure everyone understands that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. Not from anyone. Jacob smiled faintly. I think that's a good start. As Jacob left, Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. His mind was made up. Change wasn't just a promise, it was a necessity, and he would make it happen, no matter what it took. The next morning, the skies over Atlanta had cleared, but the tension surrounding the events at Regal Vogue lingered. Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, as sunlight streamed through the window. Across from him, Sophia was furiously typing on her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on so early?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but curious. Sophia didn't look up as she answered. "Research. If Ethan really wants to fix what's wrong in that store, he's going to need more than words and a staff meeting. I'm putting together a proposal, something that outlines concrete steps he can take to create real change." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Always 2 steps ahead, aren't you?" Sophia finally glanced up, her expression softening. "I learned from the best," she said, her voice tinged with affection. "But I can't just sit back and hope things get better. If there's one thing you've taught me, it's that action speaks louder than words." Marcus nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "That's my girl. Just don't burn yourself out trying to fix something that isn't yours to fix." Sophia hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "But isn't it ours to fix, Dad? This isn't just about Ethan or his store. It's about standing up to the kind of behavior that's become too normal. If we don't push back, who will?" Marcus sighed, his gaze distant. "You're right. But remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a marathon, not a sprint." Sophia smiled faintly. "Then, I guess I'd better pace myself." At Regal Vogue, the atmosphere was unusually tense. The staff had gathered in the boutique's main showroom for the mandatory meeting Ethan had called. Emma Carter stood off to the side, her arms crossed defensively as she exchanged whispers with another associate. The rest of the team lingered in awkward silence, unsure of what to expect. Ethan entered the room, his demeanor calm but commanding. He stood in the center of the group, his sharp eyes scanning their faces. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I won't take up too much of your time, but what we're about to discuss is important, not just for this store, but for each of us as individuals." Emma rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, but Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone firm. "What happened yesterday with Marcus Walker and his daughter Sophia was unacceptable. It was a failure, not just on the part of one employee, but on my part as a leader, and it's not something I will tolerate moving forward." The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Even Emma shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "We talk a lot about the image of this boutique," Ethan continued, "but image isn't just about luxury or exclusivity. It's about integrity. It's about the way we treat people, our customers, our colleagues, and everyone who walks through those doors. If we fail to uphold that standard, then everything we've built here means nothing." Emma raised her hand, her voice laced with defiance. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, how can you expect us to maintain the boutique's reputation if we're letting people like him hang around outside?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Emma, your comment just now is exactly the problem. People like Marcus Walker aren't the issue. The issue is the assumptions we make about others based on how they look or what they do for a living. That kind of thinking has no place here, or anywhere." Emma's face flushed, but she didn't respond. The rest of the staff exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice softening slightly. "I'm not here to single anyone out. This isn't about punishment, it's about growth. Starting today, we're implementing mandatory inclusivity training for all staff. We'll also be reviewing our policies to ensure they reflect the values we claim to uphold." One of the younger associates, Jacob, raised his hand. "What about Marcus and Sophia? Have you reached out to them since yesterday?" Ethan nodded. I spoke with them, and I assured them that we're taking steps to address what happened. But this isn't about making amends for one incident, it's about preventing incidents like this from happening in the first place. Jacob nodded, his expression thoughtful. That makes sense. I think this could be a turning point for us. Ethan smiled faintly. That's the goal. As the meeting concluded, the staff began to disperse, their expressions a mix of uncertainty and cautious optimism. Emma lingered near the back of the room, her arms still crossed. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face as she watched Ethan speak with Jacob. Later that afternoon, Marcus and Sophia returned to Regal Vogue at Ethan's invitation. As they entered the store, the tension that had been so palpable the day before seemed to have eased slightly. Ethan greeted them warmly, his demeanor humble but resolute. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "I wanted to update you on what we've implemented so far. And Sophia," he added, turning to her, "I heard you've been working on some ideas to help us improve." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "How did you know that?" Ethan smiled. "Clara mentioned it. She's been keeping me updated. I hope you don't mind." Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "I don't mind, but this isn't just about ideas. It's about commitment. Are you ready for that?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression steady. "Yes, I'm ready." Sophia handed him a folder filled with her proposals. "Then, let's get to work." As Ethan flipped through the pages, Marcus watched quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for the world his daughter was helping to shape. Ethan scanned through Sophia's proposals, his expression shifting from curiosity to deep contemplation. The ideas were detailed, pragmatic, and focused on creating a culture of respect and inclusivity. It was clear that Sophia had poured her heart into the document. "These are incredible," Ethan said, looking up. "You've thought of everything, from staff training programs to community outreach initiatives. This could completely transform how we operate." Sophia shrugged, though her expression betrayed a hint of pride. "It's not rocket science. It's about treating people like they matter, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have. But it's only going to work if you're serious about implementing it." Ethan nodded, his tone resolute. "I am. I'll personally oversee the implementation of these changes. This isn't just about fixing what happened yesterday. It's about making sure we live up to the standards we set for ourselves." Marcus, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "It's a good start," he said. "But like I told you before, actions speak louder than words. It's easy to make promises when the spotlight's on you. The real test is what you do when no one's watching." Ethan met Marcus's gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "You're right, and I'll prove it, not just to you, but to everyone who walks through those doors." Sophia leaned back in her chair, studying Ethan carefully. "You've got a long road ahead," she said, "but if you're willing to do the work, it'll be worth it." As their meeting concluded, Ethan walked Marcus and Sophia to the door. Before they left, he hesitated, then spoke. "There's one more thing," Ethan said, his tone thoughtful. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting since yesterday, and I realized I owe you both more than an apology. I owe you transparency." Sophia tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping momentarily. "Clara might have mentioned it already, but my path to where I am now hasn't been straightforward. My family, they didn't support my dreams of starting this boutique. They wanted me to follow a very different path, one that didn't involve fashion or creativity. When I refused, they cut me off." Sophia's eyes softened slightly, though she remained guarded. "That must have been hard." "It was," Ethan admitted. "I started with nothing, just a dream and a lot of determination. But somewhere along the way, I got so focused on building this business that I lost sight of why I started it in the first place. Yesterday was a wake-up call. It reminded me that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of your principles." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes life has a way of humbling you," he said. "The question is whether you learn from it." Ethan smiled faintly. "I intend to, and I hope I can count on your feedback as we move forward. Your perspective is invaluable, and I'd like to keep learning from you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You want my feedback?" "I do," Ethan said sincerely. "You've seen the world in ways I haven't. Your insight could help us create a place where everyone feels welcome. Marcus was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, but don't just listen. Act on it. Ethan extended his hand, and Marcus shook it firmly. Sophia watched the exchange, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a flicker of hope. Later that evening, as Marcus and Sophia walked home, the city lights glimmered in the distance. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective, like a mirror to the sky above. Sophia glanced at her father, her voice soft. Do you think he meant it? About wanting to change? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I think he does, he said finally. But wanting to change and actually changing are two different things. Only time will tell if he follows through. Sophia nodded, her thoughts drifting back to Ethan's sincerity. She wanted to believe him, but years of witnessing her father's struggles had taught her to be cautious. You know, Marcus said, breaking the silence, I'm proud of you, Sophia. The way you stood up for me. For what's right. It takes guts. Not everyone has that. Sophia smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. I learned from the best. Marcus chuckled softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. You've got a good heart. Don't ever lose that. Back at Regal Vogue, Ethan sat alone in his office, the weight of the day settling over him. On his desk lay Sophia's proposal, the pages marked with sticky notes and highlighter. He flipped through them again, his resolve growing with each word. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, Clara's familiar voice answered. Ethan, Clara said, her tone warm. How are things? Better, Ethan replied. I just wanted to thank you for everything. For stepping in yesterday, for supporting Marcus, and for holding me accountable. Clara chuckled lightly. You're welcome, but don't thank me yet. The real work is just beginning. I know, Ethan said, and I'm ready for it. As he hung up, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the boutique floor below. He had made mistakes, big ones, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path, and he knew, deep down, that Marcus and Sophia were the reason why. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Marcus's modest home, casting a golden glow over the small living room. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands as she scrolled through her phone. She paused, her lips curling into a small smile as she read an email from Ethan. He's moving forward with the plan, she said aloud, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. Marcus, seated in his favorite armchair nearby, looked up from the newspaper he was reading. Is that so? He asked, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Sophia nodded. He's already started implementing the training programs and even hired someone to oversee community outreach. He's inviting local businesses and community leaders to collaborate on creating a more inclusive environment. Marcus leaned back, his expression thoughtful. It sounds like he's serious about making a change. Sophia set her phone down, her eyes meeting her father's. It does. But it's hard to let go of the doubt, you know? After everything we've been through, it's hard to trust that people like him will really follow through. Marcus gave her a small smile, the kind that always seemed to carry the weight of his years of wisdom. Trust takes time, Sophia, but it sounds like he's taking the right steps. And maybe, just maybe, he's one of the good ones. Sophia nodded slowly, her father's words settling over her like a balm. For the first time in days, the tension in her chest eased. That afternoon, Marcus and Sophia returned to Regal Vogue for the official launch of the store's new inclusivity initiative. The boutique had undergone subtle but significant changes in the short time since their last visit. A new sign near the entrance welcomed customers of all backgrounds, and the staff, though still dressed impeccably, seemed to carry themselves with a newfound humility. Ethan greeted them at the door, his demeanor both professional and warm. Marcus, Sophia, thank you for coming, he said, shaking their hands. Today wouldn't be possible without your input. Sophia raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at her lips. Don't give us too much credit, you're the one making the changes. Ethan chuckled. Maybe so, but you both gave me the push I needed. As they stepped inside, Marcus couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The boutique felt less like a fortress of exclusivity, and more like a space that welcomed everyone. Staff members greeted customers with genuine smiles, and the tension that had once hung in the air was noticeably absent. Sophia leaned toward Marcus, her voice low. It feels different, doesn't it? Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the room. It does, in a good way. The centerpiece of the event was a small speech Ethan had prepared, delivered to a gathering of staff, customers, and local community leaders. As he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had truly reflected on his past mistakes. Today is more than just the launch of an initiative, Ethan said, his gaze sweeping across the room. It's a commitment, a promise to do better, to be better. Marcus and Sophia reminded me that change isn't just about policies or procedures, it's about people. It's about recognizing the value in every individual and creating a space where everyone feels respected and valued. The audience erupted into applause, their support palpable. Marcus, standing near the back of the room, felt a swell of pride, not just for Ethan's words, but for the role he and Sophia had played in sparking this change. As the event continued, Ethan made his way over to Marcus and Sophia. "I know it's just a start," he said, his tone earnest, "but I hope it's enough to show you that I mean what I said." Marcus extended his hand, shaking Ethan's firmly. "You're off to a good start," he said. "Keep it up." Sophia, ever the pragmatist, added, "We'll be watching." Her smile softened the statement, but the message was clear. Later that evening, as Marcus and Sophia walked home, the city around them seemed quieter, calmer. The weight of the past few days had lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility. Sophia glanced at her father, her voice soft. "You know, Dad, I wasn't sure we'd ever see something like this. Real change, I mean." Marcus gave her a small smile, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It's not the end, sweetheart. It's just the beginning. But sometimes, that's all you need. A beginning." Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with hope. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel so uncertain. The following week brought a surprising invitation to Marcus and Sophia. Ethan had reached out again, not just to thank them, but to ask for their help in an upcoming initiative. He wanted to host a community event at Regal Vogue, a space where local artisans, small business owners, and underrepresented designers could showcase their work. "It's a way to give back to the community," Ethan explained during a phone call with Sophia, "and I can't think of anyone better to help organize it than you and your father." Sophia had been skeptical at first. She'd seen too many hollow promises and empty gestures, but something in Ethan's tone felt genuine, and after a conversation with Marcus, she agreed to help. The day of the event arrived quickly. Regal Vogue had been transformed into a vibrant showcase of creativity and culture. Local designers displayed their collections on makeshift racks, while vendors set up tables filled with handmade jewelry, art, and crafts. The boutique, once a symbol of exclusivity, now buzzed with a lively and inclusive energy. Sophia walked through the crowd, her eyes sparkling as she took in the sight of people from all walks of life coming together. Ethan had outdone himself, but it was the small details that impressed her most, like the free admission, the inclusion of local food vendors, and the decision to donate a portion of the boutique's profits from the event to community programs. As she made her way toward Marcus, who was chatting with a group of visitors near the entrance, she overheard snippets of conversations. "This is incredible," one woman said to her friend, admiring a colorful dress on display. "I never thought I'd see something like this at Regal Vogue." "It's about time," her friend replied. "It's good to see them doing something meaningful." Sophia couldn't help but smile. For the first time, she felt like their efforts were paying off. Marcus, meanwhile, was in his element. Though he'd initially been hesitant about his role in the event, he found himself enjoying the opportunity to connect with others. He spoke with vendors about their work, encouraged young designers to pursue their dreams, and even shared bits of his own story when asked. One vendor, a young man named Jalen, approached him with a nervous smile. "Mr. Walker," he began, "I just wanted to say thank you. I heard about what happened here a few weeks ago, and it's inspiring to see how you stood up for yourself, and for people like me." Marcus was taken aback, but managed a humble smile. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just spoke the truth. The real credit goes to people like you, who keep pushing forward no matter what." Jalen nodded, his confidence bolstered. "Well, it means a lot. Thank you." As Jalen walked away, Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. For so long, he'd been focused on surviving, on providing for Sophia, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to inspire others. The event culminated in a short speech from Ethan, who stood on a small stage at the center of the boutique. The crowd quieted as he began to speak. Today is about more than just showcasing talent or supporting local businesses, Ethan said, his voice steady. It's about recognizing the value of every person who walks through these doors. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room until it landed on Marcus and Sophia. I want to take a moment to thank two people who have had a profound impact on me, and on this store, he continued. Marcus Walker and Sophia Walker reminded me of what truly matters. Their courage, their integrity, and their unwavering belief in the power of community are the reason we're here today. The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but the genuine gratitude in Ethan's voice made the moment feel less overwhelming. Sophia leaned over, her voice teasing. "Look at you, Dad, a real hero." Marcus chuckled softly. "Let's not get carried away." As the event wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Ethan approached Marcus and Sophia. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, but there was also a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you again," Ethan said. "Not just for today, but for everything. You both pushed me to be better, and I'll never forget that." Marcus shook his hand, his grip firm but warm. "You've done good, Ethan. Keep it up." Sophia smiled, her arms crossed. "We'll be watching," she said playfully, though the sincerity in her tone was unmistakable. Ethan chuckled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." That evening, as Marcus and Sophia walked home under the fading light of the sunset, the weight of the past few weeks finally began to lift. The journey hadn't been easy, and there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of hope. Sophia glanced at her father, her voice soft. "You know, Dad, I think we made a difference today." Marcus smiled, his eyes glistening with quiet pride. "We did, but it wasn't just us. It was everyone who showed up, everyone who believed in something better." Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're right. It's not about one person. It's about all of us." As they reached their front door, Marcus paused, looking up at the sky. "Sometimes it feels like the world's too big to change," he said. "But then you see a day like today, and you remember, change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, and those moments add up." Sophia smiled, slipping her arm through his. "Well, here's to more moments then." Marcus chuckled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Here's to more moments." And as they stepped inside, the warmth of their home enveloped them, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, hope and healing were always within reach. The story of Marcus and Sophia Walker is more than just a tale of resilience, dignity, and change. It's a reflection of the world we live in, a world that often judges too quickly, labels too harshly, and forgets too easily that every person has value, no matter their circumstances. Marcus stood as a quiet reminder that true strength isn't loud or boastful. It's in the way he faced adversity with grace, choosing dignity over anger, even when the world gave him every reason to fight back. His journey reminds us that kindness and humility are not weaknesses, but profound strengths. Sophia, on the other hand, showed us the power of speaking up. Her unwavering determination to stand by her father and challenge the status quo proved that change begins with courage. Sometimes it's the younger generation, the dreamers, the challengers, who push us toward a better future. And then there's Ethan, a man who, despite his mistakes, found the strength to look inward and take responsibility. His transformation is a testament to the idea that it's never too late to do the right thing. Change is hard, but it's possible if we're willing to learn, grow, and act. This story is a call to action for all of us. It asks us to look beyond appearances, to challenge our biases, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of where they come from or what they do. It's a reminder that real change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we come together, when we hold ourselves and each other accountable, and when we choose hope over cynicism. So, as you step away from this story, I invite you to reflect. How can you be a force for kindness and inclusion in your community? What small actions can you take to make someone feel seen, valued, and respected? A word of thanks. To each of you who has followed this journey, thank you. Your time, your attention, and your willingness to engage with this story mean the world to us. Together, we've shared moments of frustration, triumph, and hope, and that connection is what storytelling is all about. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, we'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Marcus and Sophia's journey resonated with you most? Have you experienced or witnessed moments of resilience, kindness, or change in your own life? Your voice matters, and your stories can inspire others, just as Marcus and Sophia's story has inspired us all. Let's keep the conversation alive, because the more we share, the more we understand, and the more we grow. And if you believe in the message of this story, don't hesitate to share it with others. Together, we can spread a little more hope and compassion in the world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, take care, be kind, and never stop believing in the power of change.